If we look at the history of violence and conflict in the world, particularly in Europe in maybe the last 500 years, we see that religion has been a part of the justification for that violence more often than not. It's part of why last week I tried to give a little different spin or understanding of the saying that the gospel according to John has Jesus say, where he says, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. Try to see that as more inclusive than exclusive, as affirming of our faith and our way without insisting that every other way, every other faith is wrong. There were the Crusades. There have been inquisitions. After the Reformation, there was 30 years of war between the Roman Catholics and the Protestants that devastated large swaths of Europe. In England, the only time a king was killed was when was killed over religious disputes. And up until the modern times, with the divisions between England and Ireland, violence was predicated on differences in religion. And we see the same sort of thing these days with Islam, with the huge violence between the Sunni and Shia over their split, with justification of brutality and suicidal action that comes with seeing the enemy not just as an opponent, but as the infidel. I've spent time in India. I've lived in India, and the division there that came about or was enhanced by sort of the parting violent shot of the British Empire in the division of India into a basically Hindu or secular India and a Muslim Pakistan, wherever in that large area a majority was Hindu became India. Wherever there was a majority on two different sides of the country, there was a majority Muslim, and that partition into two nations caused incredible trauma in relocations of populations and families and vengeance and terrible violence that continues to this day now with two nuclear-armed nations. And I have tried to make a distinction between spirituality and the economic and political forces, the tribal allegiances that seem to hijack that inherent human religious instinct for their own uses and purposes, but that may just be my own defensiveness and not wanting to be associated with that sort of fanaticism. I mean, it's not up to me to tell anybody else how to define their religion. I take heart in the lessons that we had for today in trying to find another way, a more open way, a more humble way, a peaceful way of affirming faith in the midst of diversity, where St. Luke, writing in Acts, tells a story about Paul in Athens, and it expresses Luke's understanding more than it does Paul's, but in this setting, Paul is speaking to the Athenians, and points to this statue. There's a lot of statues of different gods around. He compliments them on being a religious people. And says you even have a statue to this unknown God. And he uses that statue to an unknown God to make a point that the truth that is being taught by Christians, that there is one God, one source of all creation, who then may be worshipped in many forms around the world, but is fully manifested in the life of Jesus, that view was fully compatible really with Greek and Roman thought. That Christian revelation was a question of religious evolution rather than revolution. And that's trying to be politically acceptable was one of Luke's things. But in this attitude, it accepts the fact that human understanding of ultimate truth, of ultimate reality, can never absorb that truth straight on, unmediated. It needs to be mediated through expressions and experiences that point to, that hint at a reality that just can't be comprehended by human beings. Christians believe that Jesus does that best, or at least does it best for us. Better than stone idols, better than the idea that the emperor is divine, better than the philosophical arguments of a Plato or an Aristotle, better than the mystery religions with their subterranean esoteric rituals. There was something about the life and death of Jesus, what he taught, what he did, who he was, and the continuing relationship that Christians affirm that they have with Jesus beyond his death, that in the words of last week's gospel, show us the Father, that bring forth and show us, help us experience that ground of all being, that ultimate reality. But, I mean, we can claim this or claim that, but Christians generally ended up using some of the same ways to connect people to a life and faith in Jesus that the Greeks and Romans used to connect people to a life and faith with the gods of their religion. In spite of Paul saying that, we do it better. We have statues, we have crucifixes and icons. And some of them are made of stone. We don't think they're idols, but probably the pagans didn't think of their statues as idols either. We have complicated philosophical arguments to match the Greeks, the doctrine of the Trinity, for example. It's pretty interesting. We have rituals like Holy Communion, maybe not so subterranean anymore now that we've come out of the catacombs, but pretty esoteric if you think about it. I mean, eating his body, drinking his blood. We've even thought that kings had divine rights sometime. But at least here and now, in the Episcopal Church here at St. James, the primary way that we try to get across how we experience, how we understand, how we represent that connection to ultimate reality that we find through Jesus is by love. That's what the gospel is about today. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. Those who love me will be loved by my Father, and I will love them and reveal myself to them. Elsewhere, love one another as I have loved you. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Faith, hope, and love abide, but the greatest of these is love. Even God is love. You find it pretty much everywhere. Now, every once in a while I preach about the different kinds of love, at least as they were understood back when they were writing the New Testament, about falling in love as a psychiatric condition. The Greeks called it eros, and it's a very cleverly designed way to motivate us to get DNA spread around all over the place. By nature or God's intent, I don't know. We talked about what's called brotherly love or sisterly love. Love like in a family. The bonds of community, working together for mutual support or to achieve some common purpose. But the love at the center of our faith that Jesus refers to in the gospel that I'm talking about here, called agape in Greek, the love of Jesus, is not an emotion. And it's not really even a relationship. It can be expressed through those, but it's not fully described by either of those concepts. It's an awareness of a basic oneness, I think. Like we feel, if you're in a good marriage, spousal relationship, there's a sense that there's something other than just you and that other person. There's another entity. There's a couple. There's a oneness. There's a love. And Christian love is an awareness. It's an interconnection of love like that with all things, all beings, all processes in life, an awareness that no one of us really exists on our own as separate, as an isolated individual. What's individual really, undivided, is the whole of creation. And creation is really undivided from the Creator, from God. I'm not saying creation is God. I'm not a pantheist, but it's intimately, constantly inseparable from God. That's what Jesus is referring to. So I and you, you and me, I'm in God, the Spirit in you. God's being, God's Spirit, God's Word flows into creation, into time and space. And from that, our own lives arise. With no point of boundary or real alienation. That's the connection that is meant by that kind of love. Our neighbors are ourselves. Can't separate it. Christ is in us. We would not be us. We would not be if it weren't for those people that we think of as our enemies. It's an all or nothing universe. And I know it's not nothing. So that just leaves one option. We come to church, I hope, are involved in church, engage in ritual practice, share in the community here, not as some exclusive group that has a corner on the truth and some privileged track to heaven, but because it enhances the love at the center of spiritual life, the love at the center of life. It can feed us mind, heart, and soul in such ways that we are better able to represent Christ to the world. better able to be the body of Christ in the world. I mean, church can be other things too. Church can be a refuge from the world. Church can feed a kind of tender nostalgia for when times were simpler, or when we were happier, or things were less complicated, with its familiar words and music, and this familiar setting, and even familiar actions, kneeling, standing, sitting. And the church can feed, can be a place to connect with like-minded people, with allies, for community causes, for community organization, for community service. All those things are good things. But the main work of the church, as I see it, is to prophetically call out and transformationally exercise those forces that are opposed to love, that feed on fear and doubt and isolation, to see really that those things that block us in our connection, in our love, also connect us. The stress, the work, the business, the worry, the anxieties that we have that seem to block us from our true nature, from the way, the truth, the life, the love, are things that are connecting us to them. They're just in between, and we need to learn to see through them, to not stop looking when we run across it. And the main work of the church is to connect us to God, to love, to all the life in all the world, to shine a light and bring us peace. I love you.
We love you.
Thanks be to God.